Hello and welcome to this YouTube video for Preston Manor students who are preparing for their GCSE English Language. This video will be focusing on GCSE English Language Unit 1, that's with AQA, and we're going to be looking at higher tier today. This is going to be kind of a general overview of Unit 1, some of the key things, the absolutely critical things to be aware of as you tackle this paper. Our plan is after this video to do a few more specific videos which will kind of work our way through a past paper, but I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of this video. If you find this video useful, then you might want to consider following us on Twitter at PMS English Department. We won't follow you or read your tweets or anything like that. We will just tweet interesting and useful revision tips and a few other bits and pieces. So if you'd like to, then please do. So the basics of this exam then. Firstly, and one of the key points I'd really like to get across is that this is a long exam, 2 hours 15 minutes, probably one of the longest exams that you have done or will do. Planning your time carefully is therefore absolutely vital. I would go as far as to say it's the key to success in this exam. We believe, your teachers believe, that you are good at English, that you are able to tackle this exam. But the reason that sometimes people underperform in this exam is timing. So planning your time, absolutely vital. 2 hours 15 minutes, so we spend 1 hour on section A, which is reading, and 1 hour on section B, that is writing. There's also 15 minutes reading time. That's for you to read those 3 texts. So what can you do specifically in that 15 minutes reading time? Well, if I were you, I would suggest that you read all the texts through once, from start to finish. Have a look at the questions and then go back and read the texts again, this time with a pen in your hand so that you can highlight or underline or whatever all the information that you're going to use when you come to actually answer the questions. Then in section A we have 4 questions. Now the great thing about this exam, there aren't many great things about it, but one of the great things about it is that it's very predictable. So we can pretty much say what questions are going to be asked. Question 1 asks you to summarize information. Question 2 will ask you about the presentation, layout and the headline. Question 3 will ask you about thoughts and feelings. And question 4 will ask you to compare the language in 2 of the texts. You can see I put the marks there, 8, 8, 8 and 16, and therefore how you should split up your time. So roughly 12, 12, 12, 24 minutes. That will make sure you've got enough time to answer all of the questions in section A. In section B, there are only 2 questions. Question 5, the shorter writing task. Question 6, the longer writing task. And you split your time 25 minutes, 35 minutes. Now if you stick to those timings, then you can't go too far wrong, and at least you should be able to write something for every question. I can't emphasize enough that if you leave a question out, it is an absolute disaster because the grade boundaries are quite close together, so you're literally dropping a grade if you leave out even one of those questions worth only 8 marks. So do whatever you can to make sure that you can stick to those timings. Moving on then to some tips for section A. As I say, you need to plan your time extremely carefully and stick to your plan. A good advice is that if everything goes belly up and it's going wrong in terms of timing, leave your answer and move on to the next one. It's better to do sort of half or 3/4 of a question than to leave any questions blank. Read the questions very carefully, of course, and make sure that you are answering exactly what's asked. Make sure that all those wonderful language points that your teachers will have taught you, things like imperatives and superlatives and all the other metaphors and similes and lists of 3, all those things, you save them for question 4. Sometimes I think students go into the exam and they're so keen to show how much they've learned that they just kind of vomit it all out as soon as they walk in through the door on question 1. Save all those language points for question 4, which is of course the language question. For pretty much all the questions, you want to be using brief quotes to support your points. That's in section A. And when you're asked to compare in question 4, for goodness sake, use some comparisons. So Similarly, unlike in item 3, show the examiner that you are comparing. It's really important. When you're being asked to compare, make your comparisons really obvious. In section A, these are not essay questions, so don't bother with an introduction and a conclusion. Just start straight into your answer. There's absolutely loads of space. You do not have to fill all the space. In fact, I'd be a bit worried if you were filling all the space. And remember that question 4 is worth twice the number of marks that questions 1 to 3 are, so you should aim to spend twice as long and write twice as much for question 4 compared to questions 1, 2 and 3. So that's section A. In section B, again, timing is very important. A good piece of advice is to look at the audience you're being asked to write for and adapt your language accordingly. So if, for example, you're being asked to write a letter to your friend, that would be very different to if you're being asked to write a letter to your head teacher. For some reason, this exam board are pretty much obsessed with paragraphs. So remember to write in paragraphs. Quite simply, you drop a grade if you don't. Formal letters, you don't need to worry about writing out the address and the date and all that stuff. Start straight in with dear and use sir or madam if it's a formal letter and you don't know the person's name. In that situation, you end with yours faithfully. And if you're writing to somebody whose name you do know, so say it's dear Mr. Lantos, for example, then you end with yours sincerely and you make sure that you spell it correctly. And if you do one thing after you've watched this video, test yourself to make sure that you can spell sincerely properly. Remember, in section B, you are assessed on your spelling, punctuation and grammar. In section A, you're not. And the last point here, spend a few minutes planning your work and crucially, leave time to proofread it, just to check for those spelling and that punctuation and grammar. So, I hope you find some of those points useful and hopefully they were reminders. So much of this exam is about technique really and the skill of your technique. And if you follow the advice in this video, you can't go massively far wrong. You might want to get hold of the June 2013 exam paper before you watch the next video. That's going to be working through that paper kind of step by step. And you might want to ask your teacher to get you that paper, or we'll try and make sure that it's uploaded onto Firefly as well. So thank you for watching this